Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something pretty unique. We got a hypothetical podcast script titled "Strange Serenity." What if Jesus was in Dune and Power Rangers? And you're curious what kind of insights we can pull from these, well, pretty wild what-if scenarios.
Yeah, you're basically asking us to explore how the figure of Jesus might interact with these fictional universes. And honestly, I'm intrigued. It's definitely not every day we get to blend religious philosophy with pop culture icons.
Right. It's like, what would happen if you dropped Jesus into the harsh deserts of Arrakis, or right into the middle of a Power Rangers battle?
Hmm.
Let's start with Dune. I mean, this universe already has its share of messianic figures,
Right.
particularly Paul Atreides, right?
Exactly. Paul's often seen as, this chosen one destined for greatness, wielding immense power and all that. But you've pointed out in your notes you're interested in how Jesus, with his emphasis on humility and love, would navigate this world.
Yeah, exactly. And, one thing that's always fascinated me about Dune is the Freeman culture. These people are fierce warriors, completely shaped by this harsh environment. How do you think Jesus, a figure who preaches turning the other cheek, would fit into that kind of world?
It definitely challenges the traditional image of a messiah, doesn't it? Would he attempt to convert the Harkonnens, who, as you know, are known for their brutality? Would he inspire a nonviolent resistance movement among the freemen? Or would his presence force a completely different interpretation of his teachings, one that acknowledges the complexities of survival in such a hostile environment?
It really makes you think about the limits of pacifism, especially in a place like Arrakis. And then there's the spice, melange, this powerful substance, basically the lifeblood of the Dune universe. I'm curious, how do you see Jesus interacting with something like that?
Right. For those unfamiliar with Dune, melange is not only a source of immense power, but it's also a means of spiritual awakening. It's addictive and can have intoxicating effects. Now imagine Jesus, a figure who often transcended material needs, encountering a substance like this. Would he embrace it as a tool for spiritual growth, or would he reject its potentially corrupting influence?
I love that question. I mean, think about the implications. Would he encourage the freemen to use the spice responsibly? Would he try to wean them off of it completely?
It's hard to say for sure, but what's fascinating is how it forces us to consider the role of such substances within a spiritual context. Would Jesus condone its use, especially given its potential for abuse? Or would he offer an alternative path to enlightenment, one that doesn't rely on external substances?
Yeah, I mean, and how about his miracles? We all know the story of turning water into wine. Imagine that in a desert world desperate for resources. What kind of impact would that have on Arrakis?
You've hit on a really thought-provoking point. Would he use those miracles to provide immediate relief from scarcity? Or would he use them to teach a deeper lesson about resource management and sustainability?
It really makes you wonder if his actions would align with the Fremen's belief system, which
Mhm.
is all about adapting to scarcity, or if he would challenge their entire worldview. In your notes, you also mentioned this idea of Jesus being a Power Ranger. I have to admit, that one really caught my eye.
Well, the script we're examining suggests that even without superhuman strength, Jesus could be the ultimate Power Ranger team leader. Not through, brute force or flashy displays of power, but through his ability to inspire unity, selflessness, and compassion.
Now, that's an intriguing concept. Instead of relying on physical prowess, he leads by example, teaching the Power Rangers the true meaning of heroism. Kind of flips the whole Power Ranger dynamic on its head, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Instead of emphasizing the destruction of enemies, imagine Jesus guiding the Power Rangers to understand and even redeem them.
It's a radical departure from the typical good versus evil battles. But I kind of love it. I mean, can you imagine Rita Repulsa and Lord Zed actually turning to the good side?
Right. And then there's the Zord, the giant robot that each Power Ranger pilots. Traditionally, it's a weapon, a symbol of power and destruction. But what if, under Jesus' guidance, the Zord took on a completely different form?
Ooh, I love where you're going with this. Like, what if his Zord wasn't a war machine, but a symbol of healing and restoration? Maybe even shaped like a dove.
Exactly. Instead of blasting enemies into oblivion, it could be used to rebuild communities, heal the environment, maybe even mend broken relationships. It's a powerful visual, isn't it?
It is. But honestly, wouldn't there be some inherent tension there? I mean, the Power Rangers are all about fighting evil, and Jesus preaches forgiveness and pacifism. How do you think those two approaches might reconcile?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what makes this whole thought experiment so compelling. Does true heroism lie in defeating your enemies? Or is there a more profound path? One that focuses on understanding, empathy, and ultimately redemption.
It really challenges our preconceived notions about heroism and the nature of good versus evil. So far, we've got Jesus potentially disrupting the Fremen way of life in Dune, and maybe even turning the Power Rangers into pacifists. Are you starting to see any common threads between these seemingly disparate worlds?
Absolutely. Despite their vastly different settings, both Dune and Power Rangers grapple with themes of leadership, morality, and transformation. And in both universes, the introduction of Jesus disrupts the established order.
He's not just a passive observer. He's a catalyst for change, pushing characters to reevaluate their actions and beliefs. Whether it's the political machinations of Dune or the monster of the week battles of Power Rangers, his presence forces a reevaluation of the status quo.
And what's fascinating to me is how his presence challenges those very definitions of a messiah and a hero. He doesn't necessarily fit the traditional molds, forcing us to dig deeper and consider what those concepts truly mean.
It's like looking at these familiar stories through a completely new lens, prompting us to ask some pretty profound questions. So it seems these thought experiments aren't just entertaining, they actually have the potential to make us think critically about our own values and beliefs.
You're absolutely right. And that's one of the things that I find so intriguing about blending spirituality with pop culture. It makes these profound ideas more accessible and relevant, allowing us to engage with them in a way that feels fresh and engaging.
And maybe even a little bit fun, right? I mean, it's not every day you get to imagine Jesus hanging out with a Fremen or morphing into a Power Ranger.
Exactly. But beneath the surface of these fantastical scenarios lies a deeper layer of meaning, one that invites us to consider how these themes might play out in our own lives.
That's a great point. So we've journeyed through Dune and Power Rangers, imagining Jesus' impact on these fictional worlds. But now I'm curious, how do we take these thought-provoking concepts and apply them to our own reality?
That's where it gets really interesting. We've seen how Jesus' presence might challenge established norms and inspire change in these fictional universes. But what if we applied that same lens to our own world? What systems, beliefs, or even personal relationships might benefit from a similar kind of disruption?
I think that's a perfect place to pause and reflect for a moment. We'll pick up right here in part 2 of our deep dive and explore how these insights from Dune and Power Rangers can actually offer some surprisingly relevant lessons for our own lives.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were discussing how placing Jesus in these fictional universes like Dune and Power Rangers forces us to challenge our assumptions about leadership and heroism and even the nature of good and evil. Now you're interested in exploring how these insights might apply to our own reality.
Exactly. We've had all this fun imagining these wild scenarios, but what's the takeaway? How can we bridge the gap between fiction and real-world application?
Well, let's start by considering the Freemen of Dune. They're a culture defined by survival, where violence is often seen as a necessity. If Jesus were to enter that world, advocating for turning the other cheek, it would undoubtedly disrupt their entire belief system.
Yeah, it would be a pretty radical departure from their warrior ethos, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
It makes me think about how we often approach conflict in our own world. I mean, do we always jump to the most aggressive solution?
It's a valid question. The Dune scenario prompts us to consider alternative paths to justice and conflict resolution. Would a more compassionate, empathetic approach be possible, even in situations where we feel, threatened or wronged?
I mean, it's easy to say turn the other cheek when you're not facing a life or death struggle against a tyrannical power like the Harkonnens. But maybe that's the point, to challenge us to find ways to de-escalate conflict, to seek understanding even when it's difficult.
It's about expanding our toolkit for dealing with difficult situations. Perhaps it's not always about choosing between pacifism and aggression, but rather finding a balance, a way to stand up for what's right without resorting to violence whenever possible.
Right. And then there's the whole Power Rangers dynamic. I love how the script we're examining suggests that Jesus might actually turn them into pacifists. Imagine instead of epic battles with Rita Repulsa and Lord Zed, they're sitting down trying to understand their motivations, maybe even helping them to find redemption.
It's certainly a provocative idea, isn't it? It challenges us to rethink the very nature of heroism. Is it truly about defeating your enemies, or is there a more profound form of heroism in understanding and forgiving and ultimately helping them to change?
I think a lot of us struggle with this in our own lives. We hold on to grudges, we demonize those who disagree with us. Maybe there's something to be said for taking a more a more Power Rangers, or should I say, a more Jesus-inspired Power Rangers approach to those conflicts.
Right. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, even those we perceive as adversaries. It's about finding ways to build bridges instead of walls, to seek common ground even amidst disagreement.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't mean we have to condone harmful actions or become doormats, but maybe it means approaching those situations with a more open mind and a willingness to see things from a different perspective.
Now, this isn't to say that every conflict can be resolved through peace and understanding. The world is a complex place, and sometimes difficult decisions need to be made.
Right. It's not about, naive idealism, but perhaps by incorporating some of these insights, seeking nonviolent solutions, focusing on redemption rather than retribution, recognizing the humanity in everyone, we can at least start to shift the conversation.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is the true power of these thought experiments. They take seemingly outlandish scenarios and use them to illuminate real-world challenges.
It's like holding up a funhouse mirror to our own lives,
Mhm.
distorting things just enough that we see them from a fresh perspective.
Precisely. And even if we don't completely agree with the proposed outcomes, the process of engaging with these ideas can be incredibly valuable.
So we've talked about finding alternative paths to conflict resolution and redefining heroism through compassion and forgiveness. Are there any other key takeaways that we can extract from these Dune and Power Rangers scenarios and apply to our own lives?
One theme that stands out to me is this idea of challenging established systems and beliefs. In both Dune and Power Rangers, the introduction of Jesus disrupts the status quo. He questions the Fremen's reliance on violence. He challenges the Power Rangers' definition of heroism. And it's that disruption, that questioning, that ultimately leads to growth and transformation.
You're right. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but it makes sense. It's like sometimes we get so stuck in our own ways of doing things that we forget to question whether there might be a better way.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be about religion specifically. It's about cultivating a critical mindset, being willing to challenge the norms, to ask those uncomfortable questions, because sometimes that's where the most meaningful growth occurs.
So if we're trying to distill this into a practical takeaway, it's about being open to new ideas, to different perspectives, even if they challenge our existing beliefs.
Right. And that openness can manifest in so many ways. It could be reading a book that presents a viewpoint you disagree with, having a conversation with someone who holds different political beliefs, or even just taking the time to reflect on your own biases and assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about being willing to step outside our comfort zones and engage with the world in a more nuanced, critical way. It's about recognizing that growth often comes from discomfort.
Exactly. Now, I know we've been focusing a lot on the serious implications of these scenarios, but there's also an element of fun and creativity here that shouldn't be overlooked.
You're right. I mean, who wouldn't want to imagine themselves as a Power Ranger fighting alongside Jesus,
No.
or maybe even having tea with him on Arrakis?
And that's part of the beauty of blending spirituality with pop culture. It allows us to explore profound ideas in a way that feels engaging and accessible, even playful at times.
It's a reminder that learning and personal growth don't have to be dry and academic. They can be fun, imaginative, even a little bit weird.
Absolutely. And I think that's a valuable lesson in itself. Sometimes we need to let go of our seriousness to embrace the absurdity of it all. It's in those moments of playfulness and creativity that we often stumble upon the most profound insights.
I love that. So it's not just about challenging ourselves to think differently, but also to embrace the joy of exploration and discovery, to allow ourselves to be surprised by where those journeys might lead.
That's a great way to put it. And I think that's a perfect segue into our final part of this deep dive. We've unpacked these fictional scenarios, extracted some key takeaways, and now I'm excited to explore one final provocative question that was posed in this script. What other fictional universes might be transformed by the presence of Jesus?
Okay, I'm hooked. Let's dive into that right after this quick break. All right, we're back and ready to tackle that final provocative question. You want to know what other fictional universes might be transformed by the presence of Jesus, right?
That's right. That's the question posed at the end of this hypothetical podcast script, and I think it's a brilliant one. It's like opening a door to endless possibilities, inviting us to continue this thought experiment and see where it leads.
So where do we even begin? I mean, the possibilities are pretty much limitless. We could drop them into a galaxy far, far away, or maybe even into a dystopian future where technology rules. Where do you think we should start?
Well, you mentioned in your initial request that you're fascinated by the intersection of religion and pop culture, particularly in worlds that already have these, complex moral systems. What if we considered a universe like the Hunger Games?
Ooh, that's a good one. A world where children are forced to fight to the death for the entertainment of a corrupt elite. How do you think Jesus would navigate a situation like that?
Hmm.
Would he try to overthrow the capital?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because his message of love and compassion seems so at odds with the brutality of the games. But perhaps his presence wouldn't be about outright rebellion, but rather about sparking a different kind of revolution.
Like a revolution of the heart, inspiring the tributes to resist the dehumanizing nature of the games, to find ways to connect with each other's humanity, even amidst the violence.
Exactly. Imagine if, instead of fighting to the death, the tributes refused to participate, choosing solidarity and compassion over bloodshed. It wouldn't be easy, but it would send a powerful message to Panem, wouldn't it?
It would completely undermine the capital's control, forcing them to confront the barbarity of the
Hmm.
games, and it would offer a glimmer of hope, a vision of a different kind of future, one based on empathy and cooperation rather than fear and oppression.
Now let's shift gears a bit. You also mentioned an interest in universes where technology plays a significant role. What if we drop Jesus into the world of Black Mirror?
Oh wow, that's dark. Black Mirror explores the potential consequences of
Yeah.
unchecked technological advancement, often with some pretty unsettling outcomes. It's a world where our worst impulses are amplified by technology.
Right, and that's what makes it such a fascinating thought experiment. How would Jesus, a figure who emphasized human connection and spiritual values, navigate a world obsessed with digital distractions and virtual realities?
I wonder if he would reject technology altogether, or if he would find a way to use it to spread his message of love and compassion. Maybe he would hack into the
Yeah.
system and disrupt the flow of misinformation.
Or perhaps his presence would inspire people to question their dependence on technology, to reconnect with their humanity,
Mhm.
to seek meaning beyond the digital realm.
It's like in a world saturated with the technology, his message of simplicity and connection and inner peace would be even more radical and disruptive.
Right. And that's what I love about this exercise. It's not about finding definitive answers, but rather about exploring the potential for transformation,
Mm.
for challenging our assumptions, for
Yeah.
sparking new ideas.
It's about pushing the boundaries of our imagination and seeing where it leads us. And as we've been talking, I've realized that the most profound transformations might not happen on a grand scale, but rather within individual hearts and minds.
That's a really, really important point. It's not necessarily about Jesus single-handedly changing the world, but rather about how his presence might inspire individuals to make different choices, to live more authentically, to cultivate compassion in their own lives.
And those individual transformations can have a ripple effect, spreading outward and creating positive change in communities and societies and maybe even the world.
Exactly. It's like a seed being planted. It might
Right.
start small, but with the right nourishment, it can grow into something truly remarkable.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is this: the power of imagination is boundless. By exploring these what if scenarios, we open ourselves up to new perspectives. We challenge our assumptions and maybe even discover a little bit more about ourselves in the process.
And who knows, maybe these thought experiments, as fantastical as they might seem, can actually inspire us to be a little bit more kind, a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more like the figure who sparked this whole conversation.
I love that. So to our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, to keep asking those what if questions and to see where they might lead you. The journey is just beginning.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep questioning, keep imagining, and keep seeking out those unexpected connections.